Ethan Cole, CEO of Horizon Airlines, leaned back in his leather chair in his luxurious office. Two reports on his desk prevented him from relaxing. One summarized the business figures: revenue up, efficiency stable, inventory loss down, all painting a bright picture. The other, from human resources, truly captured his attention. It wasn't a formal complaint, but merely a note attached to a larger file, almost an afterthought. A few night shift supervisors had mentioned unusual behavior from an employee. Luis Ramirez, according to the report, regularly stayed late every night. No misconduct was recorded, just unusual. Ethan hated such vague language. He had seen it before. Vague often meant ignored. Vague meant something was happening beneath the surface that no one wanted to delve into. He continued reading. Luis wasn't a problem. In fact, his productivity was outstanding. Fast, consistent, error-free, never late, never called in sick. If anything, it was that he was too perfect. But something felt off to Ethan. Why would someone with such clean work figures appear in a series of minor, discrete complaints? Not exactly about him, but just strange occurrences seemingly revolving around him. A strange noise late at night, a shelf reorganized with no one claiming responsibility, safety signs moved, cameras capturing motion long after the shift ended. Ethan's gut tightened. He had built this company himself from the days when the team could gather around a folding table, and late nights meant sharing pizza and loading cargo in the rain. Now the company had hundreds of employees, 5 distribution centers, and regional directors sending him polished reports with smiling charts and sterile language. But numbers didn't lie, and neither did his instincts. He opened his drawer and pulled out a file labeled Temporary Staff. The last time he had used it was 2 years ago, when he first went undercover to investigate a warehouse manager accused of mistreating single mothers on his team. That experience had changed policies, changed the company. Perhaps it was time to do it again. By the end of the day, Ethan had cleared his schedule, called in a favor with a staffing agency, and created a fake identity. Daniel Hayes, a new temporary worker trying to make ends meet. The kind of person no one looked at twice. The kind of person who could blend into the hangar floor without anyone asking questions. That night, looking in the mirror, Ethan looked different. Hoodie, work boots, faded jeans. He let his stubble grow in and pulled a baseball cap low over his forehead. His eyes, usually sharp with a CEO's confidence, now looked softer, uncertain, curious. He didn't know what he was walking into, but he knew one thing for sure. Something wasn't right. And if there was more to Luis Ramirez than what the report indicated, he was going to find out, even if it meant becoming invisible once more. The first thing Ethan noticed about the night shift was how quiet everything felt, and not in a peaceful way. There was a low hum in the hangar, a kind of mechanical rhythm that never truly stopped. Conveyor belts clicked, scanners beeped, and forklifts rumbled as they moved along the polished concrete paths. But beneath all that was a stillness, a kind of cold routine. No music, no chatter, just people moving like machines. At 6:02 p.m., Daniel Hayes stepped onto the hangar floor. No welcome, no handshake, just a clipboard shoved into his hands with a quick nod from the night manager, a tall man with a shaved head named Greg. "Zone 3, Greg muttered, barely looking at him. "You'll be working with Luis. He's over in baggage claim." The name resonated strongly, but Ethan kept his expression neutral. He followed the layout on the clipboard, passing rows of towering shelves, pallets of sealed boxes, and yellow-striped caution zones, until he spotted someone already deeply engrossed in work, sliding a crate into position with almost mechanical precision. Luis Ramirez. He looked younger than Ethan expected, maybe in his mid-20s. Lean build, sleeves rolled up to his elbows, dark hair pulled back loosely. His safety vest hung slightly off his shoulder, and there was a quiet intensity in his every movement. No wasted steps, no hesitation. Ethan approached slowly. "Hey, Greg said I should find you. I'm Daniel, the new guy." Luis glanced over his shoulder, nodded, and pointed to an empty pallet. "Ever worked outbound before?" Not really, Ethan lied. Cool, I'll show you. And that was it. No small talk, no curiosity, just straight to work. Luis moved fast but not sloppy. He explained everything as he went, how to scan barcodes in batches, how to check for damaged labels, how to stack heavier boxes at the bottom, and distribute the weight for loading. He never raised his voice, never stumbled over a word. But what stood out most wasn't how he worked, but how everyone else treated him. A few nodded when he passed, but no one lingered. No one joked with him. No one called him by name. It was as if he existed in a separate layer of the hangar, seen but never truly noticed. Later that night, during the 15-minute break, most of the workers gathered near the vending machines and folding tables by the loading docks. Ethan sat on a crate nearby, pretending to scroll through his phone while keeping an eye on Luis in the corner. Luis didn't sit. He quietly walked along the storage aisles, picking up wrappers and discarded zip ties that others had left behind. He checked a loose safety cone and repositioned it. Then he crouched down to inspect a wheel lock on one of the pallet jacks. Something nobody would notice, let alone fix during a break. Ethan stared. This wasn't normal behavior. Luis wasn't just doing his job. He was doing everything in silence, in the background, when no one was watching. After the break, they returned to work. Luis didn't speak unless it was about the task at hand. But something in his eyes told Ethan that the silence was practiced. Like it wasn't shyness, but protection. By the end of the shift, Ethan's arms ached. His back throbbed. But Luis remained steady, still moving. When the final shipment was loaded and the others clocked out, Ethan pretended to tie his boot while watching from behind a pillar. Luis didn't leave. He grabbed a flashlight from the equipment rack, walked towards the restricted maintenance hallway, and disappeared from sight. No hesitation, like he did it every night. The most revealing things don't happen during the workday. They happen when everyone else goes home. Ethan waited by the time clock, pretending to mess with his bootlaces, his eyes flicking between the side exit and the hallway where Luis had disappeared. One by one, the rest of the night shift left, laughing softly, tapping out with tired faces, a few grumbling about traffic. But Luis didn't come back, not right away, and Ethan knew deep down he wouldn't. 10 minutes passed, then 15. The hangar was nearly silent now, the hum of machinery fading as lights clicked off zone by zone. The air felt heavier, more honest. It was as if the building was finally breathing without all the noise. Ethan moved. He followed the hallway Luis had taken, stepping quietly past the safety cones and locked janitor closets. This section of the hangar was older, a bit forgotten. Paint chipped along the corners. A leaky faucet dripped rhythmically. There were no cameras here. He has made sure of that when reviewing the floor plan days earlier. It was a dead zone, and that's where he found him. Luis was in a small, half-lit utility space, maybe 10 feet wide. It looked like an old supply room, barely used. Dust lined the walls. In the center, Luis knelt next to a busted pallet jack. Tools were spread around him. A flashlight stood upright in a plastic cup, casting long shadows across the room. He was working quietly, focused, his hands steady. Ethan stayed out of sight, his heart thumping. This wasn't part of his job. No one had asked him to do this. No work order, no repair ticket. And yet here he was, on his own time, fixing company equipment by hand, like it was second nature. Luis adjusted a bolt, tested the wheel, tightened it again. Then he stood up, wiped the sweat from his brow, and looked around. He picked up a rag and wiped down a section of wall. not because it was dirty, but because it bothered him. Then he took a notebook from his back pocket, scribbled something inside it, and tucked it away again. Ethan backed up slowly, slipped behind a row of storage bins, and waited until he heard Luis leave. By the time he made it outside, Luis was already gone. No car, no sound, like he had vanished into thin air. Ethan stood in the cold night air under the stars, wondering what drove Luis. He clearly had a reason, something deep, something personal. No one hides effort like that unless they have been ignored before or punished for caring too much. Whatever the reason, Ethan knew one thing. He hadn't just found a good worker. He had found a mystery, and it was time to dig deeper. Most people show who they are during the day. Luis revealed himself when no one was watching at all. Ethan arrived early the next evening, hours before his scheduled shift. The sun hadn't even set yet, and the hangar door was open. Luis was already there, earlier than anyone else. Again, Ethan didn't move right away. He crouched down quietly and waited, listening. Inside, Luis was humming softly to himself, barely audible. The sound of metal on metal scraped as he worked on something. A soft grunt, a click, then silence. Ethan shifted closer and peeked through the narrow gap in the door. Luis sat cross-legged on the floor. A dismantled electrical panel lay open in front of him. He wasn't guessing his way through it. He knew exactly what he was doing. He was troubleshooting. Ethan backed away, stunned. He had expected effort, maybe even quiet dedication. But this was organized, consistent, intentional. Luis wasn't just secretly fixing things. He was maintaining an entire part of the hangar system by himself, off the clock, without recognition. Why? That question weighed heavily in Ethan's chest as he slipped back into the main floor, pretending to check some incoming pallets as others started arriving for work. Weeks later, Greg waved off a baggage cart with a jammed wheel. "Tag it and leave it. Maintenance will get to it next week." But Luis was already walking over. He crouched down, peered underneath, tapped twice on the side of the engine cover. Then he pulled a tool from his vest pocket. Within minutes, he had the panel open and was adjusting something deep inside. Ethan stood nearby, pretending to reorganize a box, watching. Luis closed the panel, tried the ignition. It worked. The operator blinked. "What the hell?" Luis just nodded and walked back to his work. Ethan realized it then. Luis never hesitated to get his hands dirty, even when no one asked or cared. That wasn't just initiative, it was purpose, and Ethan needed to understand it. The next day, he walked into the hangar before sunset again, this time through the back. He had brought a small notepad, pretending to take notes on his training, but really he was mapping Luis's movements. How early he arrived, what tools he used, where he went when no one else was looking, and most importantly, what the security cameras didn't cover. As dust settled, Ethan followed Luis. He slipped into the far west side of the building, near the old inventory staging area, mostly unused now. Ethan ducked behind a steel column, peeking around the corner, his breath shallow. What he saw stopped him cold. Luis stood in the middle of the abandoned space with a bucket of tools at his feet. He wasn't fixing something this time. He was cleaning, a heavy-duty broom in one hand, a rag in the other, wiping down panels, sweeping behind dusty shelves. Ethan couldn't believe his eyes. Why? He took a small step forward, his work boots scraping against a pallet. Luis turned sharply, his eyes wide for a half-second before recognition settled in. "Daniel," he said cautiously. Ethan didn't pretend anymore. He stepped into the open, hands up, his voice calm. I'm not here to get you in trouble, Luis. Luis's shoulders remained tense. Then why are you following me? Ethan paused, then told the truth. Because I've seen how you work. I've seen what you fix, what you clean, what you protect, and no one asked you to do it. Luis looked down at the hangar floor. Someone used to get hurt here, he said quietly. A few years ago. A system failure. No one took responsibility. No one fixed the system. So when I got this job, I figured if I could keep one person from getting hurt, if I could stop one thing from going wrong, maybe I'd sleep better. Luis shrugged as if it were nothing. But it's not about credit. I don't care if they ever notice. I just don't want what happened to him to happen again. Ethan felt a tightness rise in his chest. This wasn't about overachieving. This was about protecting people from pain. And Luis was doing it with tools he bought himself. In the dark. Ethan saw everything differently now. The cracks were everywhere. Tools left out. Wires dangling near loading bays. Forklifts with warning lights ignored. Safety procedures written on posters no one read anymore. And yet, while the system sagged under its own neglect, one man had quietly been holding it together with zip ties, handwritten notes, and pure determination. Ethan spotted Luis near Zone 4, helping a new employee navigate a mislabeled shipment. He guided the guy patiently, correcting the issue gently. Ethan approached. Luis, he said, his voice low. Luis didn't look up. You shouldn't have followed me. I know, Ethan admitted, but I'm glad I did. Luis finally raised his eyes. We've been running this company for 10 years, Ethan said carefully, and I thought I knew what made it work. The systems, the numbers, the reports. But last night I realized we've built an entire culture around speed, not care. Louis didn't say anything, but his eyes stayed locked on Ethan's. I'm not here to make it about me, Ethan added. I just want to understand why you do this. Louis looked around the empty late-night hangar. I don't see it as a burden, he said. I see it as my part. Everyone else does theirs. This is mine. I don't need thanks. I just need to know the people on this floor get to go home in one piece. The words hit Ethan hard. This wasn't quiet desperation. It was quiet integrity. The kind of integrity most people talked about in motivational posters, but didn't live. I want to show you something, Louis said suddenly. Ethan blinked. What? After shift, stay back. And with that, he stood up and went back to the far hallway, waved Ethan over, and led him past the usual break zone, down a maintenance path Ethan hadn't explored yet. Then he stopped in front of a metal door. He pulled out a key. Inside was a small room, not on any map, no label, probably used as storage once. But Luis had turned it into something else. There were binders on shelves, each labeled by month, each one filled with logs of equipment inspections, informal safety notes, and checklists. On the wall was a hand-drawn map of the facility, marking critical areas and potential hazards. It wasn't charts and figures to track performance, but the best work often happens far outside anything a spreadsheet can measure. Ethan stood in the center of that tiny hidden room for longer than he realized, surrounded by the weight of what Luis had built. Not just a system, but a safeguard. A wall against everything the official processes had failed to catch. Red markers, diagrams, notes written in careful block letters. It was more organized than most of the actual safety department files he'd seen, and it was built in the dark. Ethan flew back to HQ, spent the day reviewing internal safety protocols, then spent the night digging through every HR log attached to Luis's location. What he found made his jaw clench. There had been reports of minor incidents, misplaced equipment, several near misses, a maintenance backlog 3 months long, notes about understaffed night crews, but nothing escalated. No follow-ups, no corrective action, just hollow digital checkboxes marked resolved. Worse still, no recognition for Luis. The next morning, Ethan gathered all the night shift employees in the baggage claim area. Temps, regulars, supervisors, even the forklift crew all assembled. Conversations buzzed with confusion. Some looked nervous, others just curious. Luis stood near the edge of the crowd, his expression unreadable. Ethan stepped forward. "I know most of you don't recognize me," he began, his voice calm but full of emotion. "I've been working alongside you this past week. You knew me as Daniel." Whispers rippled through the crowd. A few heads snapped towards Luis. One guy mouthed, "What?" without sound. "I came here to say one thing," Ethan continued, looking directly at Luis, who shifted awkwardly under the weight of dozens of stares. "I'm not here just to say thank you," Ethan said. "I'm here to admit that we failed." The room fell dead silent. Our systems were blind. Our culture let effort like Luis's slip through the cracks. And while leadership sat in meetings and signed policies, he did the real work. He protected all of you. Someone in the back whispered, "Damn." Greg looked like he wanted to shrink into the wall. Ethan walked towards Luis. He knew Luis hadn't done it for this. But now, for the first time, the company he quietly guarded from the shadows was finally shining a light in his direction. Recognition doesn't always come with a raise or a title. Sometimes it comes with a shift in how people finally look at you. Luis didn't say much after the meeting. Even as the applause faded and people approached him with hesitant congratulations or sheepish smiles, he stayed quiet, nodding politely, offering a few quiet thank yous. He didn't gloat. The next day, Ethan called a meeting with the entire leadership team. He placed a stack of printed copies on the table, photos of Luis's hand-drawn hazard maps, his daily logs, his private repair notes, and a copy of the maintenance checklist he had kept folded in his pocket. "This," Ethan said, tapping the papers, "is what leadership missed." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. For months, maybe longer, our systems failed. The people who were supposed to track safety didn't. The supervisors who were supposed to support their teams overlooked the most committed person in the building. Ethan outlined 3 major changes. First, immediate and public recognition for Luis Ramirez for his extraordinary acts of integrity, service, and care. Second, a safety reformation plan with Luis at the top. Every hangar would adopt his inspection model, update their camera blind spots, and implement a new system for logging concerns that bypass supervisor approval entirely. Third, a culture audit. Ethan wanted every regional lead to interview employees directly. No surveys, no HR filters, one-on-one, face-to-face. "Start listening," he said. "We don't get to lead if we don't learn." In the weeks that followed, Luis continued his work on the night shift. He didn't seek attention, but things were different. People stopped him in the halls, asked for his input. Managers who once ignored him now waited for his feedback. Workers who barely glanced at him before now nodded when he passed. And most importantly, new employees were told on day one, "If you want to know how to do things right, watch Luis." Ethan returned to visit the hangar 2 weeks later. He didn't wear a hoodie this time. No alias, no disguise. He walked in as himself and saw Luis training 2 junior safety officers. The walls had been repainted, yes, but it wasn't just the color. There was new energy in the air, a calm buzz. Workers greeted each other more, took actual breaks, laughed in places that had once echoed with only the sound of machinery. But the biggest change was that people started noticing the small things. A temp picking up trash without being asked, a shift lead replacing a broken scanner on her own initiative, an overnight crew who added handwritten notes for the morning team about what still needed attention. Ethan smiled. Things are better, right, Luis? Luis nodded. It is better. Luis hesitated, then said, becoming. Ethan liked that answer. He handed Luis a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. No letterhead, no logo, just a simple line. Thank you for doing the right thing, even when no one was watching. And beneath it, a key. Luis raised an eyebrow. There's an office waiting for you at HQ, Ethan said. If you want it. Director of Field Safety Operations. I'll understand if you'd rather stay on the floor, but the offer's real. Luis looked down, then back at Ethan, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. I'll think about it. As Ethan walked towards the exit, the afternoon light poured through the high windows, casting long beams across the hangar floor. Dust sparkled in the air. Somewhere nearby, a scanner beeped. A cart rolled across the smooth concrete. Life moved on, but now it moved differently because of one man, one choice. One moment when someone did the right thing, not for praise, not for promotion, not for recognition, but because they simply refused to look away.